don't try and think willpower will be enough, because in the long term, it rarely will be.
So what you're saying is what you eat is probably more important than how much you eat.
It is definitely a major factor.
What we've been taught is that all calories are the same. They're actually not. So food is not just energy, it's actually information.
But why we eat? So look, the best way I can describe it is we used to only eat to fill a hole in our stomachs. Now we eat to fill a hole in our hearts, right? When we're lonely, we eat. When we're bored, we eat. When we're stressed, we eat. When we feel disconnected, we eat. And that's okay, but you've got to understand that, right? A lot of the time, this is going on in the background. We don't take time to understand that, and we keep looking for the latest diet book to give us the solution. Look, the times in which we're living, Mark, I guess are the perfect way to describe this. So, in the pandemic, with these lockdowns, with these restrictions, many people have put on weight. I don't know about the American media, but the UK media have these terms like the Corona Stone, the Quarantine 15, right? So the people recognize that they're
COVID-19.
Yeah, I didn't know that one, but yeah. And so a lot of people, and especially when they're seeing the evidence for what that does to their risk of complications, they're getting quite stressed and they're looking for a new diet book to help them get on top of things. But what if that's the wrong place to look for some people? So the research suggests that about 80% of us change our eating behavior in response to stress. 45% of us or so will eat more, 35% or so will eat less. So that's almost half the population are eating more in response to stress, right? So if that's you or me, if we're eating more in response to stress and we're putting on weight, do we need a new diet book, or do we need better strategies managing stress? It's the same with sleep, for example. Like sleep, a lot of people are sleep deprived at the moment. A lot of people are worried, they're anxious. We know from the data that if you sleep, let's say 5.5 hours a night compared to 8 hours, you're gonna eat on average 22% more calories the following day. So 5 days of not sleeping well, you may eat a whole extra day's worth of calories just from not sleeping well. I'm sure your audience may be familiar with this, but what happens when you don't sleep well? Well, ghrelin, your hunger hormone, goes up, so you're always feeling hungry. Your satiety hormones go down, so you never feel full. You're more emotionally reactive in your brain. You find it harder to say no to temptation. So some of my patients, Mark, I can remember this 44-year-old lady who every January would go on a brand new diet. She'd have a bit of success. Then by March, she was back to where she was before. She was even heavier. That wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was actually that her self-esteem had gone. And that's the funny thing about the diet industry, Mark. It's the only industry where we don't blame the diet we're following. We blame ourselves. We feel like we're worthless, which speaks to what you said before, which is why I think the first paragraph in the book says, it's not your fault, right? So really trying to understand that, hey, you know what? This is not your fault. So that 44-year-old lady...
And by the way, the message that we all hear, which is losing weight is about eating less and exercising more, is implicit in that statement is that it's your fault. If you can't control your hunger and you can't get up your lazy butt off the couch, it's your fault. And that is the biggest propaganda that's been put on our population that undermines people's self-worth, like you're saying, and undermines their ability to actually understand how their body works and lose weight in a way that is integrity with their natural biological systems, which they're not doing. And so I keep going. I think this is really an important point around the blame, not blaming the victim.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to finish off on sleep. So that lady, that 44-year-old lady, I helped her lose significant amounts of weight sustainably without her even trying. I didn't actually have to focus on her diet. I just got her sleeping 8 hours a night. And actually, once she was sleeping 8 hours a night, it was like a ripple effect. She made better choices in every other aspect of her life. And again, the point of this book is to help people find the right approach for them. For someone else, it might be changing what they eat. For someone, it might be why we eat. But if we personalize that approach, we're much more likely to be successful rather than trying to follow a one-size-fits-all. But what you said about blame, Mark, there's another section in the book which I think really speaks to this, and that's, I know you know the ACEs study with Dr. Vincent Folletti and how he's shown...
What does ACEs mean?
Adverse childhood experiences. So if we have been, if we have gone through, there's a
Trauma,
list of what these
child abuse, beating, emotional abuse, abandonment,
exactly
all those
physical,
things, right?
mental, emotional, then we're significantly more likely to be overweight and obese later on in life, which kind of makes sense if you really think about it. But again, this is missing from the conversation around weight loss. And I detail a case study in the book. I remember really well this lady I saw. I think I saw her when she was about 19 or 20. And she was really struggling to lose weight. She was carrying a lot of excess body fat. And she said, Dr. Chatterjee, what's interesting is I never used to. Like this only happened in the last few years. I'm not entirely sure what's happening. And we tried various things. We weren't getting anywhere. And as I got to know her better, Mark, I started to pick up that there was something else going on here. We started to unpick that when she was 16, she was in an abusive relationship, right, with a man. And I could tell that there was real unexplored, unresolved emotion with that. I sent her for some therapy. And in those therapy sessions, it turned out that she was being abused when she was 16. And then her strategy to not be in that position ever again was to put on weight. And what I mean by that is this. She never wanted to be in an abusive relationship again. So her subconscious mind basically thought, hey, listen, if I put on weight, I'm no longer going to be unattractive. I'm no longer going to be attracted to men. Therefore, I will never be in an abusive relationship again. And it was only when we managed to unpick that in therapy over a course of months and even into years, once she had processed that emotional trauma, right, the weight started to come off. But there was no point beating her up saying, you're being lazy, you're not following the diet, you're not moving enough. That wasn't the right approach for her. And Mark, I tell you one of the most gratifying things, because I nearly didn't write this book because I thought, why go into a divisive area like weight loss? You start writing about weight loss and you start getting attacked because you like, we can talk about body positivity shortly. I'm largely in agreement with people saying we shouldn't. I'm definitely in agreement saying that we shouldn't shame people who are carrying excess body fat, which is different from not being able to talk about what are the consequences of that from a health perspective. It's two separate arguments. But since the book came out, Mark, I've had so many messages, particularly on Instagram, from people saying, Dr. Chatterjee, I just want to thank you for writing that section. And one lady in particular said, I can now see why the last 20 years I've not managed to stick to anything. I was also abused when I was 16, and reading that section has made me phone up a therapist. I've now got a session booked, and I'm now going to get back on top of my life. And that's why we write these books, Mark. It's because just for that one person who read that and now is going to take action and realize that she's not a failure, for me, that's worth it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's important to sort of, this why is so important. It's underappreciated, and I often joke, and I see often we don't ask the right questions. We ask, what are you eating, not what's eating you. And I often would ask my patients when they want to open the fridge or the pantry to get something, I say, ask yourself two questions: what am I feeling, and what do I need? Am I lonely? Do I need to call a friend? Am I hungry? Do I need to eat? Am I tired? Do I need to sleep? Am I angry? Do I need to, get it off my chest? Like what is really driving it? And, it's often different for different people, but it's that other layer that we don't think about, which is in our way, that is those beliefs or those mental obstacles or those sort of missed cues. Talk about some of the sort of hunger cues and how we kind of get off track with that, and how we can start to regulate our hunger. Because what most people say to me is, look, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I'm hungry and I get cravings and it's hard and I don't know what to do. And it's really a struggle.
I mean, the first thing, as you were just touching on there, is really identifying what are you hungry for, right? Because as I mentioned, we're often eating to fill that hole in our heart, not our stomach. And I had this really nice exercise in the book that I think your audience will probably really like. It's called the 3 Fs, or the freedom exercise. And let's say someone's listening to this, Mark, and they're sitting on their sofa in the evening, it's 8:30 at night, they've got the television on, and they feel like having some ice cream, right? Let's say, because that's pretty common for people to feel like that in the evening. Okay, so the first F is feel. Just take a pause for a minute. You can write it down if you want, or just think, what am I really feeling? Am I hungry for food, or am I hungry for something else? Right? So it could be, oh, actually, I'm really stressed today. I've been on Zoom calls all day and I've not managed to go out yet. Or it could be, I've had a row with my partner, or the children's bedtime took too long. Or, as many people are facing now, Mark, I'm lonely. You know what? I've not seen anyone. And actually, that food is providing a bit of nourishment for me. So first F is feel. What are you feeling? The second F is feed. How does food feed that feeling? Okay, I'm feeling stressed. When I eat ice cream, for 20 minutes or so, I feel less stressed. Okay, now you're building in awareness, right? So without that awareness, it can be very hard for some people to change in the long term. And the third F is finds. Now that you know what the feeling is, now that you know how food feeds that feeling, can you find now a non-food behavior to feed the same feeling? So if you're stressed out, it could be, maybe I'll run myself a bath instead of having ice cream. Or maybe I'll do 10 minutes of yoga from YouTube. Or, as we were saying before, if you're lonely, maybe actually you're better off phoning a friend or phoning your parents. You know, for many of us, we use food instead of something else. And I've used that kind of, I've used that exercise with patients for many years now. And it's hard to change straight away, right? You can't necessarily change it the first time, but you just start to build in that awareness. So day after day, week after week. I was actually doing an interview last week, and the journalist said to me, she said, Dr. Chatterjee, that's so interesting, because 2 days ago I was driving home from work and I went into a fast food restaurant and had fried chicken and fries, right? Even though I'm trying not to, right? I had it. And that exercise now really makes sense to me, because I enjoyed it in the moment. I felt disgusting afterwards. I didn't sleep well. I woke up with a headache the next day. And she goes, now that you've just told me that exercise, now when I'm in that position next time, I'll just take a pause and really try and figure out what's going on. So, you know, as you said about hunger, the first thing is, what are we truly hungry for? Now, if we are hungry for food, that's okay, right? If we're hungry for food, it's going to be very hard to resist eating if you're always hungry. Very, very hard if you're fighting hunger, which I know, Mark, you've always spoken about in your books, is like, you know, let me help you eat in a way where you're not constantly fighting hunger, where you feel satisfied and full. And in the book, I write about something that I call blissy foods. So blissy foods are, you know, these are the food products that are about as far away as possible from the real foods that both you and I like to promote people can eat. And so what are these blissy foods, right? These blissy foods are products that tend to have been designed by the food industry with these clever combinations of fat, sugar, and salt to be quite literally irresistible. And a lot of people don't really understand the neuroscience of this and what's really going on. So our brain is wired to uniquely respond to certain properties in food. So certain kinds of carbs, starch, sugar, protein, fat, salt, even the umami flavor that you get in cooked meats and broths and seaweeds. When you eat these foods in certain combinations, your brain releases a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is the learning molecule. Dopamine helps to, dopamine does many things. It creates these feelings of intense reward in your brain. These really feel good, intense feelings of rewards. So much so that if you keep eating those foods, very soon the dopamine starts to get released in anticipation of eating those foods. So not even when you're eating them, the sight, the smell, being in the same location as you were before when you ate them. And actually, I find it useful to explain this to patients, because then they understand, oh, my biology is changing. My neurochemistry is actually starting to change. So that's why it can be so hard to resist when you're being exposed to those foods. And Mark, I had this patient in her 30s who was trying her best to eat well, right? She would buy cookbooks. She'd be motivated in her kitchen to cook. But you know what? In her job, it was really interesting. In her job, she'd often finish about 7:30 p.m. This is pre-pandemic. And she would drive home. And at one of the roundabouts, do you call them roundabouts? Like we do in the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah. She would drive it. And at this roundabout, there would be a very well-known fast food restaurant there. And the smell of that food would permeate the air around that roundabout. And she said, Dr. Chatterjee, I'm trying my best, but at least 2 times a week, I'm tired, I'm stressed out after the day, that smell hits me, and I have this overwhelming feeling that I have to eat it, so I stop and eat it. And I explained to her about dopamine, and then I said to her, listen, is there an alternative route for you to drive home? And she said, yeah, but it will take me a good 10, 15 minutes longer. I said, you know what? For the next few weeks, I honestly want you to try this as an experiment. Take the other routes home. And so she started taking the other route home. She doesn't pass the junk food store, right? Temptation's not there. And I promise you, that was the only change we had to do, because suddenly she's no longer having to fight temptation. She gets home, cooks a healthy, wholesome meal. And over the next few months, she lost significant amounts of weight. And she didn't feel as though she was even trying. So again, with this personalized approach, Mark, that was the right approach for her. It may not be for me, it may not be for someone else, but for her, understanding dopamine allowed her to take a different route home.
Well, most of us don't really realize that the food that we eat has effects on our brain in ways that control our behavior, and that it's not a moral failing or some problem with your psychology, although sometimes it is a trauma, but sometimes it's just damn biology that hijacks you, and doing the things you said, you really literally can stop and end all those hunger cravings. So that's just great. One of the things that you also talk about is our environment, and I think this is something that most people don't understand is you can self-sabotage by having the wrong environment. So, for example, if I'm trying to get off coffee and I have coffee in my house, it's probably not a good idea. Or if I'm trying to get off ice cream and I got a freezer full of ice cream, probably a problem. So talk about how do we structure our environments for making our lives more effective in terms of achieving our goals, whether it's weight loss or anything else.
Yeah. Environment is arguably the number one thing to try and influence, because our environment influences our behavior so much more than we think. We kind of feel we've got, some sort of super willpower that we can resist all this temptation, but it's simply not true. Our environment influences our behavior so much. We know there's so much data on this. There's research showing that if you live within a half-mile radius of your house, so there are 6 fast food restaurants compared to 3, I think it's 40% more likely you're going to be overweight or obese. I think in schools, if they ban snacking in classrooms and in corridors, the BMI goes down on average by 11%. No one's changing, telling people what to eat. They're just saying you can only eat in the eating space, in the canteen, right? You can't eat everywhere else. So our environment really influences this massively. So what can we do? Well, I've always said, control the environments you can control, and I've heard you say this for years as well, Mark. It's like, let's not use willpower out there. I mean, it's hard out there. Make sure your house is a safe zone. So, I have a rule that in our house, we don't bring in the foods that I'm trying to avoid by and large. Now, if they ever do come in, you know what? I'm human just like everyone else. I can know the science. I can know about dopamine. But if you have that stuff in the house, if I'm tired and stressed and the TV's on in the evening, I'm going to open the packet of chips or crisps, or biscuits just like anyone else.
Yeah. Biscuits means cookies in the UK for those listening.
Yeah. And so
Biscuit sounds healthy. Biscuit sounds healthy. And you mean cookies.
I mean cookies. Yeah. But then also, what is the food you are going to expose yourself to in your environment? So, make sure it's fruit that you've got out. Make sure it's like, chopped carrots and hummus or whatever it is you want to be inputting signals into your brain. I'm not encouraging people to overeat more than they should be eating, but if you are going to have food around, make sure it's the food that's really going to help support your health and promote health and longevity, not the one that's going to take away from that. Your toaster, right? If you have a toast habit, put your toaster in a cupboard, right? Don't have it on the counter.
Forget it. Don't have the bread for the toaster. That's the big problem.
Yeah. So don't bring that into the house in the first place. But it's like, it's like trying to make the habits trying to make the behaviors that you're trying to avoid, make it harder to do those behaviors, right? But then the behaviors you do want, right, make it easier to do them. And, we spoke about this on when I came on your show last year, Mark, with my last book on habit change and 5-minute snacks. But, one of my favorite tips at the moment, frankly, for anyone, here in the UK, we're in a third complete national lockdown. So pretty much everyone or most of the population are working from home, right? And it's really affecting people's mental health and well-being, especially in the dark British winter now. It's not like last March and April when it was springtime. It is dark. It is cold. People are really struggling. But one of my favorite tips, and it's also in the book, is that in your kitchen, right, if you have a kettlebell or you have a dumbbell, and many people do these days because in the lockdowns, they all sold out everywhere, I say keep it next to your coffee machine. Right, I can see you've got a coffee machine in the background there, Mark, in the image, right? Keep a dumbbell, buy your espresso machine. And here in the UK, if many people will have at least 3 hot drinks a day, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, right? So I'm saying, okay, every time you go into your kitchen to make a hot drink, if all you do is lift up that dumbbell and do 5 bicep curls on each arm, right? If you have 3 hot drinks a day, you will lift that weight 30 times. In a week, that's over 200 times. In a month, that's nearly 1,000 times. And the beauty is, Mark, in the moment, it will feel like nothing. And why that's so powerful is it helps to build up your self-esteem, your resilience. You feel better about yourself. It's not like a 40-minute workout. Great if you can do that. But these small things, it's that feel great, lose weight. Do that every day. You're going to feel better about yourself, and that's going to ripple into other areas of your life. You're going to want to make better choices around your food. And I love that. I use that tip myself, and I don't have to lose weight. I do it because it helps improve how I feel about myself.
Fat is the key to sustained weight loss.
Yeah,
and good health.
Who would have thunk it, right?
Aren't we not supposed to have fat in our diet? Isn't it bad for us? Doesn't it
Yeah.
create heart disease and high cholesterol and all these other things that are bad for us? Or is it actually...
That's what we were all taught, right? That's the whole line. Our government told us to eat 6 to 11 servings of red rice, cereal, and pasta today, to eat a low-fat diet, and fats and oils were sparingly only at the top supposed to be eaten. And yet that advice led to the worst obesity epidemic and diabetes epidemic in the history of mankind.
That's like the food charts that we all saw in school, right?
Completely opposite of what we should be doing.
Now,
and so the science has caught up with this bad advice. And the advice, unfortunately, Lewis, was based on really shoddy science, on very weak evidence, on a few population studies, not really experimental studies. In fact, all the experimental studies that told us to eat low-fat diets, they actually didn't tell us that we should be doing that. They were actually contradicting the recommendations that were developed in 1980 by the UK and the USA.
Really?
So basically, if you looked at the actual randomized controlled trials there weren't that many, but there was a few of them, they all said that eating low-fat wasn't beneficial. But the
these were outside of the U.S. trials?
No, trials all over. Trials in the U.S.
Okay.
They just didn't look at that evidence. So the guideline committees who were working on it they sort of dismissed that evidence. And they had this theory, and they went with the theory. But because it made sense, right? If you look at calories, for example, fat has 9 calories per gram. Carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram. So you think, well, gee, if it has more calories per gram, if you eat less of it, you're going to lose more weight. It's logical.
Right.
But unfortunately, metabolism is not a math problem.
Yeah.
It's a metabolic problem. It's a hormonal problem. It's not energy balance. The whole idea of calories in, calories out. This is the biggest crock of that's been pushed on the American public, because there's a message implicit in that, which is if you just told someone to lose weight by eating less and exercising more, if they don't do it, it's their fault, right? Just eat less, exercise more. And if you don't, you're a lazy glutton. Right? So it's your fault you're fat.
Okay.
Right? But the truth is that it's not. It's not just about calorie balance. In fact, that's what the Global Energy Balance, quote, Global Energy Balance Network, which was actually funded by Coca-Cola, and they actually funded university scientists to kind of be the front people for this nonsense that's all about calories in, calories out. has been completely discredited. The New York Times wrote a big expose of this, but what we've been taught is that all calories are the same. They're actually not. So food is not just energy, it's actually information. It gives instructions, right? So this is like a big breakthrough in science, right? So food is not just calories, it's actually information. So the information in food communicates with your body every single minute. So every bite you take, it turns on or off genes that create health or disease, that make you lose or gain weight. It turns on or off hormones that make you lose or gain weight or create health or disease.
It's like a feedback for you.
It's direct instructions, and it works minute by minute. It's not something that takes a long time. It regulates inflammation. It regulates your hormones, as I said. It regulates your brain chemistry. It regulates even your gut microbiome, all the flora in your gut that we now know are linked to everything from weight gain, diabetes, to heart disease, to cancer, to autoimmune diseases, and so many other things.
It's the gut health, right?
Even depression and ADD and autism may be linked to changes in your gut flora. So we now know that when you eat food, it's not just about the energy in it. Because if that was true, then you could just survive on soda all day, and it wouldn't matter as long as you only ate 1,800 calories of soda. And I had this argument.
Right.
I had this argument with the vice chairman of Pepsi. We had dinner together, and I'm telling you.
No way.
Yeah, we had dinner. And the guy in between us, because I was sitting here, he's sitting here, the guy was like being in the middle of like a war zone. And I said to him, how can you say that eating 1,800 calories of soda is the same as having 1,800 calories of broccoli or almonds?
Right.
He says, well, as long as you have that amount of calories, it's not going to be any different. I said, this is just not how the body works.
You're not getting the nutritional value from that, right?
Right. I mean, it's not even nutritional. So just like look at 1,000 calories, let's say 750 calories of broccoli is 21 cups, 35 grams of fiber, half a teaspoon of sugar, and tons of phytonutrients, phytochemicals that upregulate your genes that actually help you prevent cancer, that improve hormone metabolism, but so many things, right? Same calories from a big gulp, 750 calories, 46 teaspoons of sugar, right? High fructose corn syrup upregulates your liver to turn on a fat production factory that makes high triglycerides.
Stores fat more, right?
Stores fat, lowers triglycerides. Raises triglycerides, lowers the good cholesterol, causes a fatty liver, raises hormones that make you, in women, make them grow hair on their face and have lost hair on their head. Men, they drop their testosterone. They have no sex drive and they lose their hair on their bodies. All this from the same calories, right?
The number of calories.
Calories are the same, but the information in the food is very different. So now we have this concept that is actually really about the hormonal, I call it the hormonal hypothesis, which I talk about in Eat Fat, Get Thin, which is how do you change your hormones so you're not hungry all the time? Because
that's the key.
The typical advice, you eat low fat, and your fat actually makes you satisfied, right? Because if you eat fat, you're not craving all the time, you're not hungry, and it actually is a brain food because it actually stops the addiction center in the brain from turning on, so you never feel hungry or have any cravings. It also speeds up your metabolism. Fat speeds up your metabolism. Yeah,
so it helps you burn more fat.
Helps you burn more fat. It releases fat from the fat cells.
Interesting.
Right. So it makes you less hungry. It makes you burn more fat, and it liberates the fat from the fat cell. So it's really powerful. Whereas if you eat sugar, the opposite happens. You get hungrier because you increase insulin. I
used to have so much sugar.
It's terrible.
I was addicted to it.
All of us were. I mean, I was too. I was a vegetarian. I ate like tons of whole wheat bread and sugar and honey and everything. Grape nuts and ice cream for breakfast.
That was my life, right? So when did you stop? When did the research become known, or the facts or the data become known?
It's not even. It's honest. That's why I wrote
because you're a
this
doctor
book.
and you were eating sugar.
No, it's not
When did you start to realize it? When did this information about fat become?
Well, it's been mounting for decades, right? So it's building on a mountain of evidence. And in the book, I reviewed over 1,000 studies, or 500 quoted in the book that I referenced. They wouldn't let me put more because there was no room in the back of the book.
Yeah.
And it's all well documented, and the science of this is very powerful. One of my colleagues, David Ludwig, wrote a book called Always Hungry. He's a Harvard professor. He's done a lot of the research that this is based on, where he actually gave two groups of people same calories, but changed the percents of fat and carbs. And it was a very well-controlled study. And in the first group, they had 60% carbs, 20% fat, 20% protein. The other group switched it, 60% fat, 20% carbs, 20% protein. So it's the opposite. And the group that had the high-fat diet burned 300 calories more a day by doing nothing else.
Really? Just by having more fat?
By eating more fat, their metabolism sped up 300 calories a day. It's like running.
Same amount of calories, though.
They ate the same amount of calories in.
But they burned 300 more.
Right, because their metabolism sped up.
Interesting.
Right. So in other words, it's like running an hour a day without getting off the couch.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Very powerful.
Yeah, and I know for me, as I've seen myself and my patients, the transformation's amazing, and their cholesterol gets better. It's totally contradictory.
Yeah.
Right? Fat is supposed to raise your cholesterol. Right? Eating cholesterol is supposed to raise your cholesterol. But for the first time since the dietary guidelines came out in 1980, the U.S. government in 2015 completely reversed their stance on fat. There's no more restriction. Like January, first week of January 2016.
This year. Like a few weeks ago. They just changed this.
They changed this completely.
The whole guide.
Completely. So first time they said, forget about fat. You can eat as much as you want.
No way.
No limit on fat.
This is the government,
The government, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee established these recommendations. This is a scientific group that establishes guidelines for the government, helps them shape policy, and then the government makes the policy. They kind of
based around this research or this.
Yeah, they said, don't worry about fat, don't worry about cholesterol. Eggs are back, right? Eggs are back. Forget about the egg white omelets. Just eat the whole egg.
No way.
Completely. And they said it made me laugh. They said cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern. Quote, nutrient of concern. Like, well, we got it wrong for 35 years.
No way.
Yeah.
So it's like.
It's totally different. And they also said that we should, for the first time, they said we should reduce sugar. Now, the policy advisors, who are the scientists, said we should limit sugar-sweetened beverages because they're proven to be linked to obesity and diabetes. But the government, because of the food lobby, changed the wording to say, no, we should be restricting added sugar. So we should eat less added sugars. Now, what's an added sugar? It doesn't say added sugar on the label.
Right.
So how do you know? Because the food labeling from the FDA is also influenced by the food lobby.
Right.
So it should say added sugar on the label, not just sugar. Right. So you don't know.
Right. Interesting.
So it's designed to totally confuse people. But the truth is that this is a huge advance, and now we actually have come to realize that this is not true. So the science around fat and how your body burns fat and what makes you fat is all really clear now. And it's all based on this hormone idea of insulin, which is a fat storage hormone.
Yes.
So anything you eat that increases insulin, which is sugar, refined flour. I mean, white flour raises your blood sugar more than table sugar. So if you had 2 slices of white bread, it raises your blood sugar more than a tablespoon of table sugar. People are like, I'm eating whole wheat bread. It's just as bad. Unless the bread is so dense that you can stand on it without it squishing, then you shouldn't eat it.
Shouldn't eat it.
No, like the German rye bread.
I love bread, though.
Yeah, everybody loves
challenge.
bread. Now, the bread we eat isn't the bread we ate, right? So our ancestors ate very different bread.
It's not the hard bread.
It was very coarse, and we only had the grain mills that started in the 1800s. Before that, we couldn't eat refined grain, and now even whole wheat is super refined. It's just,
And are all grains bad as well, in your opinion?
No, I don't think all grains are bad. I joke. I say, in the book, I talk about, an induction plan, like basically a way to get quick start to change you from like just being storing fat to burning fat to eating fat to makes you thin. And that's a 21-day plan. And after that, I talk about how you transition to what I call a Pagan diet. Pagan, as opposed to paleo or vegan. It was kind of a joke because one day I was sitting
in between.
Yeah, I was sitting on a panel with 2 friends of mine. One was a vegan cardiologist, and the other was like a paleo doctor.
Sure.
And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I must be a Pagan because I'm in the middle here.
Okay. What does a Pagan diet look like?
So a Pagan diet, what's amazing, Louis, is that the principles of paleo vegan are often very similar. So both groups believe that we should be eating whole, unprocessed, unrefined foods.
Yes.
We should get rid of food additives,
Foods
hormones.
from the ground.
Everything. Yeah. No antibiotics, no hormones, no pesticides, no GMO. We should be having no MSG, no artificial sweeteners, no high fructose corn syrup. Everybody agrees that's true. We also agree that everybody should be eating lots of fruits and vegetables.
Yes.
Right? A little heavy on the plant foods.
Yep.
Basic principles. Both agree that we shouldn't have dairy, which is interesting.
Yes.
Right? We'll talk about that.
Paleo, no dairy as well.
No
right?
dairy, right.
Yeah.
No dairy. No
I guess
vegan.
there's some of them that say like some specific cheeses or something.
Yeah, grass-fed butter. There's some things, but but the proteins in dairy are very inflammatory, and the dairy again we eat isn't the dairy we ate. We've hybridized our cows, it's all fertilized by one bull.
It's not organic dairy.
And it's not organic. It's not raw. It's not how our ancestors ate it.
And,
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Even organic cows, they pump milk them when they're pregnant, and they're just full of hormones. So,
okay.
and also, it's just not always tolerated well by many people.
Right.
And then,
what else do they both have in common?
Everybody agrees that we should be eating foods that are phytonutrient rich, that are nutrient dense, and we should be eating lots of nuts and seeds and lots of good oils like avocados and olive oil.
What's phytonutrient? What does that mean?
Phytonutrient is a chemical that's in plant foods. Phyto means plant, and it's not a vitamin or mineral. It's not a protein, fat, or carb or fiber. It's something else. So, for example, like broccoli has glucosinolates, which upregulates detoxification.
Okay.
Catechins are in green tea, which are powerful detoxifiers of metal, powerful antioxidants. Tomatoes have lycopene, which is a powerful cancer preventer for prostate cancer.
Okay.
Anthocyanidins. You can have black rice, which has anthocyanidins, which are powerful antioxidants that are in black rice. It's emperor's rice. Love that. It's also very low glycemic.
Sure.
So I think the things that they disagree on are basically beans, grains, and meat. Like where you get your protein from. Everything else is the same.
Paleo and vegan is the same. Except for meat, beans,
and protein. I mean, beans, grains, and protein.
Beans, grains, and protein. Okay.
Right, and I mean, meat.
Right.
And so,
Sure.
What I realize is that I think many people who are sick do better when you take out certain things that can be inflammatory or high glycemic. So if you're, for example, carbohydrate intolerant and you're diabetic, which affects a lot of people. I talk about how do you find out if you're carbohydrate intolerant in the book, which is there's a questionnaire you can tell if you actually know if you're someone who's carbohydrate intolerant, like someone who's gluten intolerant. That means if they eat a lot of starch, if they have like 2 cups of rice, even if it's brown rice or 2 cups of beans, it can adversely affect their sugar. So I talk about like having less, like having smaller portions of beans and grains.
Sure.
And non-gluten grains in particular, because gluten can be very inflammatory for many people. I think for some people who don't react to it, it can be fine, but not in large amounts. And then I think meat is the big issue, right? So meat is the big issue. So should we be eating meat?
We just had dinner the other night.
Right.
We both had meat, right?
We had fish.
We had fish.
We had black cod.
Yes, that's great.
Which was awesome.
I had a mahi. You had a black cod. Is that what it was?
Oh, you had I had the black cod.
Yeah.
I had the black cod. The guy next to me had meatballs.
Yeah. Guy next to me had carne asada.
But so the issues around meat also I think are everybody agrees, and fish. Everybody agrees that if anybody eats meat, it should be humanely raised. It should be sustainably raised. It should be grass-fed. It should be not harming the environment. The ethical and the environmental issues around animal eating are big and they're real.
Yeah.
I mean, I have many Buddhist patients. I have a Buddhist monk who's like an abbot who's is a diabetic, and he's never going to eat an animal. So I need to help him understand he's never going to eat an egg, how to eat a higher fat protein diet, which is low glycemic.
Right.
So we can do that.
Okay.
Right. So more nuts and seeds. Less rice, more beans. Just there's strategies for doing that.
Sure.
And he did great. He lost 35 pounds, reversed his diabetes, and now I have tons of bun people, praying for me.
That's great.
Yeah, and then the meat thing is tricky because it's also an environmental risk. If you're eating factory farmed animals, there's antibiotics in that, and there's runoff from the pesticides and fertilizers that damages our water supply and rivers and lakes. There's climate change that happens from the methane produced. It's more toxic to the environment than carbon dioxide. There's high energy use. 1/5 of all our fossil fuels are used for growing animals for human consumption. Our water is being used up at incredible rates for feeding animals. There's basically I think 70% of all water use, and there's basically only 5% of the world's surface is fresh water.
It's usable.
Is fresh water.
Yeah.
Right, 1% is in Russia.
Wow.
And at least 4% for the rest of us, and 70% of that is being used for feeding animals for human consumption. So there's real environmental issues.
Sure.
So I think a factory farming should be not supported in any way, and we need to change that. And that means we need to change our patterns of consumption around meat. We need to downsize our meat consumption. I call it having condiment. Condiment, as opposed to like a condiment, like condiment. It should be a side dish or a dressing if you're going to eat it.
Sure.
And I think
not a full plate of steak. You mean?
I think there's 3 issues with meat, right? There's environmental issues, there's moral issues, and there's health issues. So we kind of talked about the moral. I think that's
Yeah.
People are entitled to their beliefs, and they should be able to follow whatever they want and be healthy. The environmental issues are real, and I think everybody would agree, whether they're paleo-vegan, that we need to stop harming the environment. And I think even if you're not paleo-vegan, everybody really believes that. In fact, the Dietary Advisory Committee that was advising the government said we should limit meat consumption because of the environmental impact. Right now, if you have grass-fed meat, if you have sustainably raised meat, you can't. It's not as abundant. You can't produce as much, and so we all have to eat less of it.
Right,
and it's more expensive. So, but that's okay. And I think that from a health point of view, when I really looked at the literature, and I did this in Eat Fat Get Thin, I looked at all the research that I could find on meat because I'm like, well, I don't know.
You want to know for yourself too.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm recommending to my patients. I'm a human too, and I want to live a long time, and I don't want to be doing something stupid.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find out what does the science tell us about meat.
So you did all the research.
So I looked at all the research, and I wrote 8,000 words in the book on meat.
Wow.
There's a lot of research in there. And I addressed all these issues, environmental, moral, and the health issues were quite interesting. When we look at the studies on meat, and anybody can quote anything saying anything, right?
Right.
So you want the paleo people like, meat's healthy, here's all the research. And the vegan like, meat's going to kill you, here's all the research.
Yeah.
So it's like, and then you're at the average Joe, you're totally confused. And your average doctor, you're totally confused because we get no training in nutrition.
And they haven't done the research themselves.
No,
so they're going off of their opinion or their theory.
Yeah, they're like average people like the rest of us in terms of nutrition science. They don't know because it's not what we learn, right? Yeah. I mean, I just am at Cleveland Clinic, and we implemented a nutrition curriculum for the first time in the medical school. They have this integrated in, which is so great. And
that's awesome.
I helped Tim Ryan, who's a congressman from Ohio, introduce Tim. You love Tim. He's great. Has he been on the show?
He's been on here, yeah.
He's great. Introduce a bill called the Enrich Act, which was a bill that is funding $15 million to fund nutrition in medical schools, nutrition education for doctors.
Interesting. That's what we need the most because doctors,
a
lot of the time, I feel like could heal a lot of their patients
through
food.
Oh my God. Well, food is the cause of most chronic disease. It's the cure for most chronic disease, and yet doctors know nothing about food.
And they just medicate a lot of the time.
I mean, listen, it's so bad. I mean, I use food as medicine. That's food is the most powerful drug on the planet. I mean, that's why last week I was in Cleveland at the hospital teaching 300 black women how to cook in a cooking class. Like, that's what doctors should be doing because that's how I'm going to get people healthy.
That's real medicine, right?
That's real medicine.
Now, just a quick side note. What is your involvement with, what is functional medicine and what is your involvement at the Cleveland Clinic?
Can I finish my meat?
Yes, go ahead.
I was still rolling on the meat, and then we'll talk about functional medicine, and then we'll talk about Cleveland Clinic.
Perfect.
Because people want to know. Like, they're like, well, what about meat? They're like probably listening.
Let's do it.
So the science.
8,000 words.
I'm not going to give you 8,000 words, but I'll give you a few hundred.
Perfect.
So the science of meat was fascinating. So when I looked at the studies that showed it was harmful, here's what they were. They were mostly population studies, meaning they looked at groups of people, followed them, and then they asked questions of them. What did you eat last year? What did you eat last week? What did you last month? And they basically do these food frequency questionnaires, and then they correlate that with the risk of disease. And they try to control for all the confounding factors, but it's very tough. So the people who ate meat, they had more heart disease and more cancer and more death. But what else was?
They were smoking, they were drinking,
exactly.
they weren't sleeping,
exactly.
Stressed out.
So if you look at the data, they ate 800 more calories a day.
Yeah.
They almost eat no fruits and vegetables.
Tons of sugar.
They had tons of sugar and processed food, lots of fried foods. Drank more, smoked more, didn't exercise, and didn't take any vitamins and minerals. Well, guess what? They weren't as healthy as the other people. So most of the studies were like that. Now, there was a few studies that were interesting I found. One was a study of 11,000 people who shopped at health food stores. And they found there were like a lot of vegetarians and a lot of meat eaters. So who are the people who are, like healthy meat eaters who only eat grass-fed meat or because most of these studies were not on grass-fed meat either. They were on factory farm meat, right? So then again, how do you generalize that?
Sure.
But then there were these 11,000 people, and they followed them for many years, and they found that the meat eaters and the vegetarians, there was no difference in their health outcomes. Exactly the same. So if you're a meat eater who basically eats a healthy diet and has grass-fed meat versus a vegan or vegetarian, no difference in health outcomes. And you have a healthy lifestyle, then there's no difference. So there's other factors like how it affects your gut flora and so on. And I think, those are more complicated issues. I address all of them in the book. But at the end of the day, I think it's okay if you have no moral issues and you can eat sustainably raised meat and not in great quantities and as part of your diet. I think it's okay.
Right. And eat smarter. You talk about our idea of calories being a little bit misconstrued, that the whole science of calories in, calories out, something I've talked a lot about, is kind of not really true. And just so you know, Sean, even though you and I have looked at the science, and we're not PhDs in nutrition, we don't work at big academic centers, although I do work at Cleveland Clinic. And there are, endocrine societies and specialists and so forth that look at all the data. But what I was having a conversation with my colleague from Harvard, David Ludwig, who's been researching the science of calories and glycemic load and index for 30 years. And it's really clearly established through very carefully designed experiments, not just population studies, but carefully designed interventional experiments with randomized control groups, looking at different effects of metabolic health of different calories. And he did one study where he literally found if you ate exactly the same calories, but low carb and higher fat, you would actually burn 450 calories more a day than the control group eating exactly the same calories, just because of the different effects of these macronutrients on your metabolism. And what I was shockingly informed of by him the other day were 2 position papers by the Endocrine Society that reiterated that weight loss is all about calories. Why is this so wrong?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in Eat Smarter, we go back and look at the inception of the calorie. And I'm a big fan of doing this. Like, where did this whole thing come from? And looking at how this became such the focal point in nutrition. It really revolves around the calorie, which when it was invented, it wasn't even utilized. Nobody was looking for anything to measure energy in food, by the way. It was used in physics and engineering, but it made its parlay into the nutritional world thanks to Wilbur Atwater, which we have the Atwater system, which kind of goes on a lot of food labels right now, which is very skewed, by the way. But what really impressed it upon our culture, there was a massive bestseller in the early part of the 1900s, Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters. And it sold like 2 million copies, which is like 1 billion copies today.
Wow.
It's just like everybody had this book. And she made the shift in that point as a popular paradigm in the culture of looking at food in terms of numbers, no longer looking at food in terms of food and the dynamic aspects that it has on our bodies as far as its relationship to our endocrine system and our neurotransmitters and all those other things. And so she said, from this point forward, we would no longer look at a slice of bread. We'll no longer say a slice of bread. We'll say 100 calories of bread. We'll no longer say a slice of pie. We'll say 350 calories of pie. And within that indoctrination, she also began the widespread association of food with morality and impressing upon culture as a character defect if you're not able to manage your weight, and using terms like punishment and sin. And this was also during the time of World War I. So it was widespread food rationing going on too. And so one of her quotes, and I went back and read this old fangled book. I just couldn't believe some of this stuff in here, but she said that essentially, for every hunger pang you feel, you should have a double joy in knowing that you are preventing the pangs in another starving child.
Wow.
Or you're supporting your country and making sure other people can eat. And this also is very important because it associated weight loss with hunger. It's working when you're hungry. And these things have continued to proliferate in our culture unchecked. Now, just going back to your point with calories in particular. Now, this is one of the most fascinating aspects of this, because it's not that calories are not valuable. It's a measurement. It's a measurement of energy. It's a tool of measurement, but it's different because a meter is a measurement of distance, but that's consistent.
Right.
Within the human body, it's completely eliminating the complexity of digestion. And so one of the fascinating things that I want folks to know, and starting to really evolve the concept of calories, is that the type of food matters. And one of the studies highlighted in Eat Smarter, this was from the journal Food and Nutrition Research. And they took test subjects and they had them to consume a meal of either whole foods or processed foods to see what it did on the rate of calorie burn. And it was shocking. Now, the whole food meal was what they call this whole food meal, multi-grain bread and cheddar cheese. While the processed food meal was white bread and cheese product, which is cheese product, by the way, that's Kraft. All right. It's Kraft cheese. They can't legally call it cheese. It's cheese product.
Yeah, it has to be 51% cheese. That's why it's called American slices, not American cheese. It should be your first warning. It's a cheese-like substance.
Exactly. And so they compiled all the data. They had, test subjects eat either or. And after they compiled the data, listen to this. This is what happened. The folks who consumed the processed food sandwich, even though it was the same amount of calories, the same amount of protein, carbs, and fats on paper, the folks who ate the processed food sandwich had a 50% reduction in calorie burn after consuming that meal of processed food. It changed the way their body was managing the calories they consumed. And it caused their body to retain and hold on to more of that processed food energy. All right. That's just one aspect. And we go through about 5 or 6 of the different dynamics.
So what you're saying is what you eat is probably more important than how much you eat.
It is definitely a major factor, and if folks can start to make this shift and just evolve, take it up a notch, because we tend to get into this, unfortunately, like you just mentioned, we have amazing colleagues who do work in this field. I just taught a neuroscience class at NYU yesterday. I get to do all of these really cool things, but the science on food and metabolism and weight loss, it tends to be very lopsided, even for the quote experts, the best in the business, who are just like, you just need to be in a calorie deficit. You need to be in a calorie deficit, and completely ignoring the complexity of the endocrine system and digestion. And also, one of the things we really dive into and provide the cutting edge research is the effect that your microbiome has on the rate of calorie burn.
Absolutely. I mean, this is really functional medicine, right? Food is information. It's not just calories. When you eat, and it's different than if you burn a calorie in a lab. I mean, if you burn a calorie in a lab, and 500 calories of soda and 500 calories of broccoli are exactly the same. They both release the same amount of energy, and that's defined as how much energy it takes to raise 1 liter of water, 1 degree centigrade. That's a calorie. And it's fine. When you eat them, it's very different, because when you're eating the foods, they're going through all sorts of different mechanisms that change what happens. So they alter your microbiome, which changes your weight. You literally can swap out bugs from a thin mouse to a fat mouse, and that fat mouse will lose weight because of the thin making microbiome, right? So you're feeding the microbiome, you're driving inflammation or cooling it off, which drives weight gain. You're regulating hormones like insulin, testosterone, estrogen by what you eat. You're regulating your mitochondria, which really about how much energy you burn. You're regulating all these various factors that are so critical for weight regulation, your brain chemistry, your hormones. And you write all about this in Eat Smarter, which is why it's such a smarter book, because you actually address these scientific issues that still are staggering to me, that most traditional doctors, nutritionists, academicians, and nutrition societies and the government all don't buy into. And it's really, honestly, I hate to say this, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that the food industry wins by all calories being the same, because then you can have 100 calorie soda or 100 calorie bunch of blueberries and there's no difference. But that's just absurd. Even a 5th grader or a kindergarten kid would understand that, 500 calories of soda and 500 calories of blueberries are pretty different when you eat them.
And it's your fault. It's your fault.
It's your fault. It's your fault. You're overweight, right? Because if you just ate less and exercised more, everything would be great.
Manage those calories, and you'll lose weight. And the entire paradigm is really skewed. And I got to reiterate this, because when you just mentioned the research in mice, for example, now we have paralleled research in humans. This is cutting edge data that's getting out to the world right now. And one of the fascinating studies, this was published in Cell, they looked at what's happening in mice depending upon their microbiome cascade. And they found that there's specific, I'm so excited, specific bacteria that's found in mice that actually reduced the amount of calories that they were absorbing from the food that they were eating. Now you take that piece of data and marry that with the human data that we have now. And this was conducted at the Weizmann Institute of Science. And what they did was they were taking, this is well known right now, guys, but I want everybody to get it today, that when folks, once our bodies start to venture into being overweight and obese, our microbiome changes massively. And now we know that there's a kind of a bacteria cascade that is associated with being overweight. All right. It's like a fingerprint. All right. It's a very unique kind of dynamic thing, all of our metabolism, but there is a very specific spectrum that you see when folks start to become obese. And what they did was they took these human fat bacteria associated with obesity and put them into lean mice. And then the mice inherently gained weight.
Yeah.
Their insulin sensitivity went down and they gained body fat, versus taking the bacteria from a healthy human subject and putting it into the mice, and the mice continue to stay lean. Changing the bacteria in our bodies has a massive impact. And one of the other studies took a set of twins, all right? And all they did was they had them on the same calorie reduced diet, but one of them had a microbiome associated with obesity and one had a microbiome associated with leanness on the same diet. And they're twins.
Wow.
On the same diet. The one with the microbiome associated with obesity continued to gain weight while the other one didn't. So this is real stuff.
That's
so
incredible.
What do we do to fix this is where we really got to put our focus.
I agree. And I think, I just want to sort of summarize a few key elements here that are worth underscoring. And then I want to talk about the three major things that cause problems when you want to try to lose fat. So if you eat ultra processed food, by the way, it's 60% of our calories. It's most of what Americans eat, all the starch, sugar, processed food, anything that's sort of made in a factory that's not from real ingredients. One, if you're eating it, even if it's the identical same calories as whole food, your metabolism's slower. That's what you just said. Two, in another study, they found that if you let people eat ultra processed food compared to regular whole foods, they'll eat 500 calories more a day. So they'll eat more and they'll be hungrier. And three, it changes your microbiome in ways that increase bad bacteria that cause weight gain. And of course, there's a lot of other things that drive inflammation, hormone, and appetite issues, which are really the things that really you talk about that are the three major things when it comes to fat loss. So let's dig into those three things: inflammation, hormone dysfunction, and appetite problems, which is, I had a doctor call me about one of his patients for advice. And he says, just this guy really exercises all the time. You really focus on eating healthy, but he's just hungry all the time. And I'm like, well, it's probably because of what he's eating that's driving his brain chemistry and his immune system and all the mechanisms that drive hunger. So we have to change that. And it's not that hard to do.
Yeah.
So tell us about those three things.
Absolutely. And the thing that I really wanted to usher in and bring to the forefront, because it sounds the most like ghostly, it sounds like Casper the Ghost, like it's not even a real thing, is inflammation, and how inflammation has an impact on your body composition. And the data exists. It's just that a lot of folks don't know about it. And the way that it really manifests when we're talking about inflammation is that it has this very detrimental impact on our organs that are related to our body's production and utilization of our fat loss related hormones. So namely, let's take our liver, for example. Your liver is incredibly important in regulating your metabolism. When we're talking about a relationship with how it manages insulin, even the production of fat takes place in your liver too. The storing of glycogen can take place in your liver. If your body's overburdened by glucose, your liver can literally convert that into fat right there on the spot. And so if something is damaging your liver, it's going to inherently damage your endocrine system and your process of metabolism. So inflammation, and I've just kind of shared some of the data in the book, damaging your liver. And this is one of the most fast growing issues in our country is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Yeah. And this is really a kind of chronically inflamed situation taking place in our liver. And also,
how do we get fatty livers? Because I think people should know. We go to fancy restaurants and they give you foie gras, which is French for fatty liver. and it's how do they get the ducks to be like that? And how do they get us humans to have 90 million Americans with fatty liver?
Everybody should know by now. Very simple. The fastest way to damage your liver and to create that fatty liver, by the way, it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because we associate it with alcohol, but sugar, absolutely. Sugar, starch, flour. It's so bad. It's so bad, particularly high fructose corn syrup. Your liver has to take on the brunt of it because your liver is really, even the name live. Right. It's responsible for so much, like every minute it's filtering your entire blood supply. It's so important.
That's right.
But to take this one step further, and I'll just drop this little nugget so we can move on to the other topics, but also the master regulator, often referred to, of course, I've even taught this in my conventional university setting, but your hypothalamus, all right? Your hypothalamus is one of the major regulators. And communicators with your thyroid, with your liver, with your adrenals, all the organs related to fat loss and fat storage. The governing kind of master gland is called the master gland, is your hypothalamus.
That's in your brain.
Data, right. And now we've got data that this new term, neuroinflammation, inflammation specifically regarding the function of your hypothalamus can damage what's happening with your metabolism. But nobody's talking about that in these cookie cutter diets, that you need to address the inflammation in your brain in order for you to lose weight. Right. So these are all, and the beautiful part is it's possible. It's not just possible, it's probable when you have the right information, and we avoid the things that create the inflammation. And namely, you just mentioned sugar, but we go through a whole subset of the different things.
Yeah.
So
and in
that's
functional
one
medicine,
category.
we also look at, food sensitivities and environmental toxins and the microbiome and all. There's so many things that drive inflammation. And if you're overweight, you're inflamed. And for those listening, think, I'm a few pounds overweight, a little extra belly fat, maybe I need to lose 10, 20 pounds, or maybe you're more overweight or obese. You should really pay attention to what Sean's saying, because right now during this COVID pandemic, what we're finding is those people who are overweight or obese or have even a little bit of extra fat are much more likely to get sick, much more likely to end up in the hospital, the ICU, and to die from COVID-19 because of poor metabolic health. And what's so beautiful about the body is that you think, oh my God, I've taken years and years to get here. Within a couple of weeks, you can change all of that. You might not lose all the weight in a couple of weeks, but you can change your inflammation markers, your hormones, your brain chemistry, literally in a couple of weeks of changing your diet and following the principles that are in Eat Smarter, which is Sean's new book, which you should all get a copy of.
It's about applying behavior change to everything. It's about applying the rules of behavior change to everything we want, whether that's weight loss, mental health, physical, whatever it is. Don't try and think willpower will be enough, because in the long term, it rarely will be.
Yeah, it's interesting. We I don't know how much you get into the book, but one of the challenges I find with people is that, they spend, days and hours, weeks researching like their vacation spot and rental and what the restaurants are going to go to and the airplanes are going to do and what they're going to bring and what they're going to pack and everything they need. And most people don't give 5 minutes of thought to planning their nutritional week. What is my week going to look like? Where's my food going to come from? What do I have to get? How do I have to prepare it? How do I not end up in a food emergency? How do I have the things around that actually work? And I do it now automatically, but I understand it's not something that people normally have. So I have, for example, every morning I'm doing like a shake now. I'm trying to put on some muscle, and I'm just focusing on this super shake that I've been creating. But I have all the ingredients on the counter, and I make sure I have my bananas I buy or my frozen fruit that I buy, and it's in the freezer, and I have everything ready. So, and I buy extra jars of the macadamia milk. So I have everything just all there. So it's super quick and easy for me to do. But if I had to go shopping and I forgot this and I didn't do that, and it would be very difficult. And so I think sometimes it's even as extreme as people organizing their fridges with Tupperwares with pre-cut vegetables and pre-cut fruit and pre-cut all these prepared things that are easy to make. And I see people who do that, and it's like, wow, that's even next level for me. But I just make sure that you have to think about what you're doing. You have to plan what you're doing, to plan your activity. And I think we don't schedule ourselves first, we schedule ourselves last, and then eating is an afterthought, and it just becomes well, I don't know, let me go get some this and something quick, or package this, or, just eat crap, whatever's there. And I think that's a challenge for people. So I think it's important that the environment, as you say, is structured to succeed as opposed to fail. And I think that's the take home. The other thing, I really want to get into, and this is challenging because right now during COVID, people are isolated alone. They may not have been great chefs or cooks before, or you can't go out to restaurants. Sometimes there's not even takeout anymore. And people have been, I think, taught that cooking is difficult, that eating healthy is expensive. Is this true? And how do you address the issues of, cooking and cost and feel great, lose weight?
Yeah, so there is a section on cooking and explaining just how important it is. It's that basic life skill that until recently, I'm pretty sure all families, all humans, all tribes would have had that ability. And it's something that is now optional. It can only have been optional because we have the ability to buy all these food products so quickly, so cheaply, and our lives are so busy, they're stressed out. A lot of us feel we don't have time to cook, and certainly in certain socioeconomic groups, I think we have to accept that actually it's not about money so much. It's about having the luxury of time to cook, which a lot of people will say, if I'm working 2 jobs, I don't have time to cook, right? So I think cost and time poverty is something we should be absolutely aware of. Now, I don't think, I think, the research, and I think, Mark, we spoke about this when you came on my podcast recently, is that it's simply not true that eating well has to be really, really expensive. Of course, there are certain things that are more expensive. There's no question. Like wild salmon, for example, is probably more expensive. But, a can of sardines is dirt cheap here in the UK. Do you know what I mean? There are ways that actually we can eat in a way that actually is whole food, but isn't super, super expensive. And I think where you live can really influence what's available, what you consider normal. We mentioned environment before, but our friend circle, our own sort of network of tribes, that's important as well. The research by Nicholas Christakis has shown that, someone in your social circle is obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese. If a friend of a friend is obese, you're 25% more likely to be obese. And if it's a friend of a friend of a friend, you're 10% more likely to be obese, which just shows just how powerful these social connections are, and the environment, even our friends and family environment, is at influencing us. But it really isn't, Mark, as expensive as we think, or some people think it might be, to eat well. But you have to be able to cook, right? That is a basic skill. And if you cannot cook, that's okay, right? Recognize it and go. Learning to cook may be one of the most important things that you can learn to do, whether it's in one of your cookbooks, Mark, whether it's to go on YouTube. There is so many free and cheap resources now to teach people how to cook some basic meals. And, the truth is that the pandemic, for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, Mark, there's been a lot more time at home, a lot more time with family. And I know many people who have got into cooking during lockdowns, during these restrictions. Suddenly they're not commuting for 2.5 hours a day, and they're actually buying cookbooks and they're learning how to cook recipes. I've got to say, Mark, my new routine on a Sunday afternoon, which really has come in the last year. I love nothing more than this. On a Sunday afternoon, after lunch, right? I clear out the kitchen. I'm a bit old school. I put on a CD, and I've got a CD player in the kitchen. I put on one of my favorite CDs, and I cook a big batch of butternut squash soup to last us for the week, right? I've got lentils in it, butternut squash. It's got leeks, onions, ginger. I'm trying to think about the price of it, but lentils are dirt cheap, right? 2 or 3 butternut squashes are not that expensive. And apart from that, it's stock, leeks, onions, and ginger. It's kind of like that. Not only is it not expensive, but those 1.5, 2 hours are some of the most enjoyable times I spend in the week. I've got some great tunes on. I'm chilling. My daughter may be there drawing on the kitchen counter. We may be chatting at the same time. And at the end of it, there's the smell, there's the feeling that you're really connected with the food. And then that's going to go in the fridge. So in the week, if we ever need something for a meal, we can just go and heat that up. And so I'd really encourage people to find what works for them. Where is that moment in your week where you can actually find a bit of time to batch cook? If you are trying to cook something from scratch 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that's where it can become really challenging. Not only is that a huge cognitive load, 21 times now I need to think about what I'm going to eat in just 1 week, right? So batch cook more. And one of the tips in the what we eat section is eat dinner for breakfast, right? It's such a simple thing that people haven't thought of before. It's like eating, you know what it's like, Mark. The breakfast foods that we often start our days with are literally setting ourselves up for hunger, terrible. For mood swings. And if you cook a bit extra at night, heat it up in the morning, have some salmon, sweet potatoes and broccoli in the morning sometimes if that's what you have the night before. And often people find that they're just not hungry until lunchtime. There was this case I had, this exactly someone who was having what he thought was healthy granola every morning. Sugar-filled granola.
Yeah.
He thought it was healthy, and he didn't really need to lose that much weight, but he found that his concentration was going, his focus was going. He'd get a bit shaky by 12 o'clock, and he started having, and this guy was vegetarian, right? And I remember it so well. He said, well, what shall I have? I said, well, what do you have in the evening? He goes, well, I love roast vegetables. I said, okay, what do you have with it? He says, goat's cheese. I said, well, okay, why don't you start there? So the next morning, he has goat's cheese with roast vegetable. And he said it got to 2 p.m. before he was even hungry. And he said, I didn't realize before that my concentration wasn't good and my energy wasn't good. It's only when I had a real food breakfast that I realized, oh, wow, I've been functioning suboptimally for years. And so, you know this as well as I do, Mark. I mean, there's plenty of tips on how people can do this inside the book. But, I really want to encourage people to take this rounded approach. If you have tried already and focused on one area and it's not been sustainable for you, let me help you figure out why that is. Maybe there's something else that you've not tackled that's actually the underlying root cause.
Yeah, it's so important because we just sort of stay on the surface and don't really figure it out. I just love your story of cooking. I think most of us feel so disenfranchised from it, but with COVID now, it's an opportunity for us to really dig in and try new things and to be with family and to be with the people you love, and we have more time. And I think if people can reclaim their kitchens, it's really the key to weight loss. I always tell the story of this family I worked with in South Carolina who was living on food stamps and disability in a trailer with a family of 5, and were massively overweight. The father was diabetic on dialysis. The mother was 100 plus pounds overweight. The son was like probably 100 pounds overweight, almost diabetic at 16 years old. All I did was cook a simple meal with them, showed how fun it was to do it together. They didn't even have cutting boards and knives. I had to get them that afterwards. And they ended up losing, 200 pounds together as a family in the first year. And the son actually went back and gained weight because he had to go work at Bojangles, which is the only places kids can get work, which is a junk food, fast food restaurant in the South. And but then he went on to lose 138 pounds, went to medical school, and it was really all through the simple act of cooking one meal. And I think if you can imagine, if we could go into everybody's home and show them how to shop and cook one simple meal, the basic cooking techniques, how to cut things, they know how to peel an onion, they know how to peel garlic, they know how to make a salad dressing from simple olive oil and vinegar, they know how to stir fry, they know how to, it was stunning. Everything they'd had was from a box, a package, or can that was either heated in a microwave in the oven, or it was terrible. And it made me really realize how powerful it is to empower people with a simple act of cooking real food at home. And it's much, much cheaper. And I gave them a guide on good food on a tight budget, which is how to eat well for less. And they were able to do it within the budget that they had for 5 people on disability and food stamps.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful, Mark, when stories like that. And, when I filmed the first series of BBC One's Doctor in the House, where I'd go and live alongside families for 4 to 6 weeks, it was a common theme. I'm going to say in at least half of the families that I went and stayed with, they didn't know how to cook, or it was something they used to do and they've lost the habit. And I remember in the first season, the lady with type 2 diabetes, I remember just, again, cooking them a basic meal, chopping things together. These guys were used to getting McDonald's several times a week. And I remember, you mentioned cost. I can remember that so well. In 2015, my first day filming ever, Mark, right? So I go to this family's house in Shrewsbury in the UK. First day I meet them, and we start off, because I'm going to stay at their house that night for the first night, which they didn't know. I didn't realize that. And the father said to me, he said, hey, I said to them, hey guys, I'd love to find out a little bit about what you guys eat normally. And the dad said to me, okay, well, look, why don't you come along and I'll show you. So he points to his car seat. So I get into his car. We drive for 15 minutes out of town, right? 15 minutes out of town. We go into a McDonald's drive-through. And this is a family of 4. So husband and wife. I think the daughter, the daughter and the son were like teenagers, 15, 16, 17, something like that. He ordered 4 double meals from McDonald's, right? And the cost was £48. So let's put that in perspective. £48, I don't know what the exchange rate is at the moment. It must be at least $65 to $70, right? And he said, we do this. And what was interesting, Mark, is as we were driving there, he said to me, hey, Doc, this is actually really embarrassing. Now, you coming with me, but this is what we do 4 to 5 times a week. So what's interesting is several things. He's spending $65, $70 on 4 double meals from McDonald's, right? Which when they ate, they were hungry 30 minutes later and they were moody afterwards, right? But the second thing is, and this speaks to what we were talking about before, is that when he's driving there with me sitting next to him, he suddenly says, hey, Doc, you know what? This is really embarrassing, right? But he only realized that with me sitting in the car next to him, because if it's just him and his family, he can do it. No one's questioning him. I wasn't judging him. I wasn't questioning him. But the simple act of me being there was like a mirror to him. And he goes, man, we do this 4 or 5 times a week. You know, and that's really interesting from an emotional viewpoint, isn't it? What's really going on there?
Yeah, it's so powerful. I think we don't realize how much we get into habits unconsciously and just do those things without thinking. And then it leads over the course of our life to just dramatic changes in our health and our well-being. And what kills me, and I think you experience the same thing, is how close people are to feeling good, right? If the feel great part, I mean, the lose weight part, is slow. You can do a pound a week maybe, but when there's more, depending on what you're doing, initially you might lose more. But the feel great part can happen pretty quick. And I think, most people, when they start to shift their diet and they start to change their habits and they start to understand how to sort of reprogram their biology for well-being and health, that they were like, well, wow, I didn't know how quickly I could feel better. I didn't know I was feeling so bad till I started feeling so good. And it's so rewarding for me to see that the simple act of eating real food and regulating your life in a way that supports health has such dramatic downstream benefits on mental health, on mood, on relationships, on work, on productivity, on just parenting, on everything that you care about in your life. If you don't have your biology well regulated, you're a victim to the whims of all these influences that are outside of us, which is, the food we're eating is information, as we learned from our mentor, Jeff Bland, and it is a instruction manual that is telling everything in our body what to do. And, we often think that our emotional states, our psychological states, or our relationships are not triggered by food, but it can be really dramatic, and just to sort of recap a little bit about what our friend David Perlmutter wrote about in his book, Brainwash, where he was on the podcast. He talked about how people are eating the processed food that we're all eating now, 60% of our diet. It disconnects the frontal lobe from the limbic brain, which means the limbic brain is the reptile brain that is reacting, responding, gets angry, fight or flight, all that. It disconnects that from the frontal lobe, which is the adult in the brain. It's sort of the higher self. And so all of a sudden you've got this dysregulated reptile in your brain that's not being supervised by an adult, and it leads to all this disordered behavior. And I part of me wonders if our societies become so divisive, so conflicted, and there's so much rancor because of our diet, in part because how it affects our brains and our functioning.
Yeah, I mean, so powerful to hear that. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think it's not just going to be one thing, is it? It's all these multiple inputs coming from all the way around, and that's the whole thing about food, isn't it? It's so reductive to talk about it just in terms of calories and energy into the body and energy out. As you say, food is information that's so much more than just those calories. And actually, we're doing food a disservice by just talking about it in terms of energy. It is more than that. Genetic expression, hormones, as you say, with the brain, what it might be doing. Absolutely incredible. And we mentioned emotions before, but again, it goes both ways, doesn't it? You can feel stressed and want to eat more, but actually eating the wrong kinds of food consistently can make you more hungry and cause you to overeat and can cause you to crave more of those foods. So it kind of, it feeds it on both ways. And I sort of feel that the right approach for each person is going to be slightly different. But I think, we can absolutely agree that I don't know anybody who won't benefit from eating more real food in their diets. I can't see the downside of doing that.
No. Now let's talk about the other boogeyman in the room around weight, which is exercise. and you know, part of the equation, right, is eat less, exercise more, which implies that, you know, you're not thin because you don't exercise enough or you don't move enough. And I think there's some really fundamental flaws with that idea. Not that exercise isn't important, but that in the hierarchy of weight loss, it really is not as important as what you eat, where you eat, when you eat, how you eat, why you eat in determining your metabolism. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the myths about exercise and also what the role of exercise is in metabolism and weight?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's one of the biggest myths out there. And it makes sense, doesn't it? That it's just a simple equation that you just sort of add up. And at the end of the day, that then determines if you're going to put on weight or put off weight. If only it was that simple, right? So what is the deal with exercise? So there's some new research from Herman Ponce, which has come out in the last few years. And he's been studying the Hadza tribe in Tanzania. And he's been measuring their energy expenditure. And it's super fascinating, Mark, because what he's shown is that these hunter-gatherers are moving a lot more than the average sedentary Westerner, right? They're moving a lot more. But you know how many calories they're burning off? Roughly the same, 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day, which is roughly the same as the average sedentary Westerner burns off, even though they're moving more. So what is going on there? And this is kind of one of those big myths. So we think that if we go for a run and we burn off 400 calories on our run, let's say, we feel that number is additive. We just add it on to the number we would have burnt off, and we've got 400 extra calories there. But it's simply not true. Our body is a complex system. Your body will compensate. If you burn off more calories running, it will reduce how many calories it burns off in other areas. And there's multiple ways it will do that. It will reduce NEAT, non-exercise activated thermogenesis. So, you know, toe tapping and fidgeting, it will reduce that. It can change how many calories it burns off in other departments in the body. And the point is that we are this complex system. And I think this is where it gets really misunderstood. Going back to what we said at the start, Mark, people are not only depriving themselves and restricting themselves with foods, they're putting themselves on punishing exercise regimes. We all know when we see that person really struggling in the gym, you know, who's pounding the treadmill 3-4 times a week for an hour, wondering why the fat is not coming off, without realizing that for sometimes you're actually stressing out your body even more and raising cortisol, which can actually make the weight loss harder in the first place. But it's not, you know, it's not that moving more is necessarily going to burn off more. And I think that is brand new information for some people. I think that science is really, really fascinating. And it reshapes everything we've been taught for the last 20, 30 years, that you've got to move more. You've got to move more. Now, what role does it play? I think exercise is really important. So can you lose weight without doing any exercise at all? Absolutely. Would I recommend it? Absolutely not. I feel that the reason to move is not to burn off calories, but it's to make yourself feel good. It's to build your self-esteem up. You know, when we're moving regularly, we're showing our body that we're an active, thriving human who's engaging with life. Humans are animals. We're designed to move. So I think movement is very important, but it's about feeling good, not burning off calories. So like I said before, that tip about the dumbbell by the kitchen, right? What's that going to do in isolation by the kettle, you know, lifting that several times a day? You know, it's not like the 30, 40-minute workout we've been told for years that we have to be doing to losing weight. But what it will do is it changes the signals in your body. It just keeps giving you these little inputs that actually, you know what? I'm alive. I'm engaging with life. I'm an active human who is able to lift a heavy weight or a mediumly heavy weight. And it really boosts self-esteem, which helps you engage in other behaviors in a much better way. And actually, Mark, you know, I've been thinking recently that for many people, weight loss is actually a self-esteem issue. It's about how they feel about themselves. Once they start to love themselves, have compassion to themselves, they no longer want to punish themselves with highly processed, sugary foods. They no longer want to punish themselves by sitting on the sofa all day watching TV, not getting up and moving. So I kind of feel that compassion part, that self-love, is also a part of this equation that we're not speaking about enough. Because when you truly love yourself and value yourself for who you are, you don't want to beat yourself up. You don't want to engage in lots of unhealthy behaviors. So I think movement has a very important role to play, but it's not the role that we've been taught. You don't need it to lose weight. I just think it helps you boost how you feel.
No, it's true. I've had people lose 100 pounds without changing their exercise. But the other thing is that you cannot exercise your way out of a bad diet. So if you have one cookie, you have to walk 4 miles. If you if you eat one supersized meal, you have to run 4 miles a day for a week to burn it off. And if you eat that every day, you have to run a marathon every day just to keep up. So you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. That's really important people to understand. On the other hand, what you're saying is really important, that it is about, one, just improving your overall well-being, your mental health, and the side effect, if you do certain kinds of exercise like high intensity interval training and strength training, you will literally increase your metabolic rate so that you burn calories all day long, as opposed to just when you're exercising. So there is a strategy to including it, but you can exercise all you want if you're eating poorly. My weight trainer, the guy who was sort of my trainer in New York, was incredibly fit. He had like big muscles, but he had this sort of big layer of fat on him as well. And within 6 weeks, he lost 20 pounds just by shifting his diet. And this is a guy who worked out hours and hours a day. And I think even somebody like that, who's an extreme level of fitness, still can have a lot of body fat if they don't understand how to eat in a way to regulate their biology.
Traditional medicine is pretty simple. Eat less, exercise more. That's the solution. Count calories, count your steps. I mean, it's just not working. So what do we do differently in functional medicine?
So first of all, we get a really detailed history, right? We find out from that person their timeline. When did weight become more of an issue for them? Was it just this slow progressive increase over the years, or was there a time where they had this big spike in weight? That really impacts how we think about what could be that underlying cause for them, right? If all of a sudden somebody gains weight, then you go, and okay, maybe there's something going on with their thyroid. Maybe something shifted there, right? If it's that slow progressive weight gain, then maybe it's a combination of just getting the wrong foods and not sleeping enough or not exercising enough, right? So how they gained and when they gained the weight really gives us information.
Yeah. So everybody's different. This is what functional medicine is. It's personalized medicine, personalized health.
Yep.
And we actually dig into your individual imbalances and correct them, and that leads as a side effect to weight loss. Yes. I never get people to lose weight. I mean, I never say lose weight. I never say we're putting on a diet. I say, here's the things that are out of balance. Let's get them back in balance. We'll cross our fingers and see what happens.
Yep.
And it's often a miracle what you see.
Yeah.
And
the
again,
weight just comes off.
Yeah. And people, there are weird cases of things. Like I remember a case where there was a doctor who came to see me, a woman who had gained 100 pounds in a few years. And her colleagues were like, oh, you're just eating too much, don't eat so much, get a gastric bypass, this and that. She's like, no, something's wrong. And I'm like, well, she showed me her driver's license picture and she looked like completely different. And I'm like, well, what's going on with this? And I just said, look, it's probably something weird. So let's check things like her cortisol level. And we checked her cortisol level, it was off the chart, and she had a tumor on her adrenal gland that was causing high levels of cortisol, which makes you hungry and fat. And stress makes you fat in the same way. So you could be, I know this woman who was, and so we had her adrenal gland tumor taken out, and she lost 100 pounds like that.
Right.
I had another patient I remember years ago was struggling, and she had gained 40 pounds, and her daughter lived in Israel. And she was so stressed because it was during the time of the conflict there and the constant bombings and terrorist attacks. And she was just constantly stressed.
Yeah.
And as soon as her daughter came home, she lost 40 pounds.
Right, right. Or I think there's a really interesting connection with the gut and food sensitivities and weight, right? So when we put people on elimination diets, like, somebody does like your 10-day reset, or you pull away inflammatory foods and they lose weight so quickly, right? That's a sign that they're eating a food that's causing their body inflammation, right?
Wait, what does inflammation have to do with weight gain?
Oh, well, when there's inflammation, that causes us to hold on to water, and that causes weight gain. And inflammation also damages the mitochondria, and that impacts weight gain. So it has a huge...
And it also makes you pre-diabetic.
Yes.
So you could be eating the same things, but if you're stressed, you're actually raising cortisol. Right?
Yep. And if the insulin goes high, then you're going to gain more weight from the food that you eat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated, but in functional medicine, we really have a map to diagnose each person's dysfunction and imbalance with their thyroid or mercury or cortisol or the gut microbiome or your mitochondria. Yep. There are all sorts of things that go wrong that most doctors overlook. And, and the problem with medicine today is that we sort of blame the victim. Like if you're overweight, it's because you eat too much and you don't have self-control and you're not taking personal responsibility. And we blame the victim. Yep. And we don't actually have a way for helping these people figure it out. Right. So, I think this is really important for people to understand that we now know a lot about metabolism and weight and all the various factors that go into affecting it and how to fix them, where we necessarily didn't know a lot before. Yep. But now the more and more we're knowing, we can actually figure out how through food and various strategies help people lose weight. So I want to talk to you about a few cases you had that were interesting about how we saw these patients at the Ultra Wellness Center and what exactly you did to help them figure out their issues.
Yeah. So the first person that came in or one of the women that came in, she was 55, and she had she was overweight, about 40 pounds overweight, and she had noted that her kids had just gone off to college. It was time for her to start taking care of herself, but she had noted that over the years after her pregnancy, she just slowly started to gain weight. And, she was exercising and taking care of herself, but, those 30, 40 pounds just slowly came on over the years. And what we noted with her, we did her waist to hip ratio. We saw her waist to hip ratio was elevated, indicating that there was insulin resistance. We also checked a fasting insulin. We saw that it was high, also indicating that insulin resistance. We saw that
when insulin's high, you can't lose weight because
Right.
it locks the fat in the fat cells. It slows your metabolism. It makes you hungry and crave carbs.
Yep.
And it makes your body store fat. So
Exactly.
you're literally creating a total chaotic sabotage of your body when your insulin levels are high and you're eating all this starch and sugar.
Right. So we had to figure out, how do we help drop her insulin levels, right? How do we help drop her insulin levels? Well, you can do that when you shift diet, because we know that when we eat fat, right, the body doesn't need to make insulin to use that fat. Mm-hmm. So when you eat carbohydrates, your body makes insulin, and when you eat a lot of the refined processed carbohydrates, your insulin levels spike. Yeah. So when we shift the diet to one that's a little lower or a lot lower in the refined and processed carbohydrates and more healthy fats, that helps with people with feeling better and not feeling so hungry. It helps prevent those insulin spikes, and it helps us not gain as much weight around the belly.
Yeah, it's so important to focus on insulin. And most doctors don't even test your insulin. So you don't even know what it is.
Right.
But if you check it and it should be less than 5, you're good. Yep. And if it's over 10, it's pretty bad. And it can go up to 50, 100 or more. And especially after you eat, it can get worse. Right. And I wish we had a little monitor where we could quickly measure insulin for people, and how like a continuous glucose monitor or continuous insulin monitor. I think it would be way more interesting.
I agree.
And I think that we actually know how to fix it. And people need to realize that without insulin, you can't gain weight, right? If you take a type 1 diabetic whose pancreas is damaged by an autoimmune disease, and you look at their symptoms, their weight loss and hunger, they're eating 10,000 calories a day and losing weight.
Right.
Why? Because without insulin, you can't store the fat.
Right.
So this is really important for people to understand. It's so powerful. And that's why strategies that help fix insulin are so key for weight loss for most people.
Yeah. And, we were so 20 years ago or so, we were so programmed on that pyramid, right? Where we were making sure we were getting enough grains and
6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta a day. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And so it caused a lot of high insulin for people, and and they're having a harder time with they're feeling hungry all the time, and they're having a harder time with weight loss because of it. So sometimes people get really surprised when we pull away, either pull all away the grains or keep them very minimal. They're like, really? I thought I was supposed to eat all of these, right? And that can really help with those cravings.
It does.
And
getting more fat.
Yeah, and getting more fat.
So if you could eat so much fat and not gain weight, because we used to think that fat made you fat, right? Because it has 9 calories per gram versus 4 for carbohydrates or protein. So if you want to cut out the calories, you just cut out the fat.
Yep.
Well, that's what happened. We cut out the fat and had a low-fat craze, or low-fat salad dressing and low-fat Snackwell cookies and low-fat muffins, and they were all full of starch and sugar.
Yep.
And that was the worst thing that could have happened. So when you eat fat, you don't increase your insulin. You speed up your metabolism.
Right.
There's that study by our friend David Ludwig, where he basically gave people food. So he knew what they were eating. It was either 60% carbs, 10% fat, or it was 60% fat and 20% carbs. And on the 60% fat, eating exactly the same amount of calories every day, the metabolism increased on the high-fat diet. So doing the same level of activity, the people who were the most overweight and insulin resistant, their metabolism increased by 400 calories a day. That's like running over an hour a day without getting off the couch. And that would account for the entire obesity epidemic if we could fix that. So this is a really important strategy.
Yeah. And so she then lost, her numbers came down beautifully. Her blood pressure was a little high and it came down. Her insulin came down, and she lost about 10 pounds. But she then got a little, 35. Right. So she got a little bit stuck. And I think that's where we shifted things a little bit. And I think sometimes that's really important, is that, sometimes the body gets a little used to a certain plan and you have to change things up. And I think that's where intermittent fasting can be really helpful. And so we put her on a program, it's called a 5-2 program, where 2 days a week, she cut down her calories significantly. It was like a 500 to 600 calories on those 2 days, because she was really not eating very much on those 2 days. And she could pick whatever 2 days she wanted. And the other 5 days, she wasn't as strict. And that's when, her body started to kick in and her metabolism improved. Yeah. I think probably because of the impact on the mitochondria. Yeah. But it was impressive.
Well, let's back up and talk about this, because, I think there's so much information now online in the media about this whole intermittent fasting thing. Yep. And there's lots of different terms like time restricted eating and, intermittent fasting and fasting mimicking diets and ketogenic diets. And it turns out they all do the same thing. And so, tell us a little bit about each of these and how they work and why they're so effective.
Right. So, time restricted eating just means that you're not eating for specific periods of the day, or you are only eating for certain times of the day. So a typical way that somebody will do a time restricted eating plan is say, okay, I'm only going to eat for 8 hours in the day, and I'll eat between 11 and 7.
And you fast for 16.
And then you fast for the other 16.
I mean, even just 12 is good. Most people eat all day, eat all up to the time they go to bed, and then they wake up and they eat again.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that is a great place to start with everyone, because if we can just get people to not eat after dinner, right? Yeah. Their things will improve, because we know that the food that we're eating later in the evening, that nighttime eating, will cause more of an insulin spike, right? So we know that that's really important to pay attention to. So saying to people, okay, let's try with at least not eating for 12 hours a day. So,
then you move to 14 and then 16, right?
Yep. But, and not everybody needs to go longer, but there's good research with the 12 to 13 in terms of helping with longevity, helping decrease risk of cancer. There's some interesting research on breast cancer and not eating for 13 hours at night. So I think that's something that we can really work with a lot of patients to do and say, okay, let's say at 6 to 7 at night, that's when you stop. and not eat until the next 7 a.m.
Yeah.
time or whatever that is for them.
Yeah, and there's so much research on this now, and they all do similar things, whether you're time restricted eating, whether you're intermittent fasting, like, fasting 1 day a week, or the 5-2 program, or whether you're, trying a ketogenic diet, which activates the same systems in the body. All of it does the same thing. It enhances your energy production, your mitochondrial health, which is really important. It fixes insulin resistance and gets rid of belly fat. It builds muscle. It improves your brain chemistry and your cognitive function. It helps your bone density, and it even helps production of stem cells. It reduces inflammation, and it reduces your antioxidant burden. I mean, it reduces your oxidative stress, so you get more antioxidants produced. So it's a very powerful way of focusing not on what you're eating or how much you're eating, but when you're eating. Right. And that's a very interesting angle that we really haven't focused on. We always focused on how much, and then we're now focusing on what, because not all calories are the same, and now we have to focus on when.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, that there's a lot of ways to hack weight loss that have to do with the right kind of approach. And if you're not doing it right, you can kind of get in trouble, but you need to know what you're doing. And I think there's a lot that we can share about this, and we'll share at the end about how to actually do this. So that's a key thing. So what other things, we had this other patient that you had that was a male who really struggled. He was overweight, about 40 pounds. So tell us about him.
Yeah. So, he came in and he was 55, and he was really struggling with his energy. He was very low energy. He was really frustrated with his sexual function. He noticed he had a low libido. He was having some erectile issues. He'd gained these 40 pounds around his belly, but he was really having a hard time with losing them, losing that weight. And
the higher your belly fat, the lower your testosterone.
Yes, because that belly fat has that aromatase enzyme, which takes your testosterone and converts it into estrogen.
Yeah, and then they lose the hair on their body. They get man boobs, right? They get breasts. It's like it's a real thing.
It's a real thing, and it's a great motivator for men, right? We know that as your waist circumference goes up, so does issues with erectile dysfunction. So but we need to give them the tools to be able to lose that weight around the belly, right?
So he had all these other issues, and you sort of figured out that he had insulin resistance too, that we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did with him was put him on like that 10-day reset that you've put together, which really I think is a great jumpstart for people, because it can help them say, okay, I gotta try this, but I need the tools, I need the map to do it.
Yeah.
And it's really motivating, because many times, because people were eating inflammatory foods before, or they were eating the wrong foods at the wrong time, right? And they do this and they notice a significant improvement in how they feel. And then they're like, okay, I can really shift this.
Yes.
I can make a change.
Yeah.
So we did that before any tests
And the 10-day
came
reset,
back.
is based on what we've been doing in our center for decades, which is an anti-inflammatory, low glycemic, higher fat, phytochemical rich, fiber rich diet. It actually helps to reset your whole biology, not just about weight, but any chronic illnesses or symptoms you have is so effective.
Right, because you're pulling away the inflammatory foods, which for a lot of people, those inflammatory foods are triggering a lot of their symptoms.
And you can actually get access to the free program at getpharmacy.com. That's getpharmacy.com. And if you want the upgrade on it, you can get with the coaches that help you go through it, with the shakes and the supplements that help enhance the program. So it's all on there. Just go to getpharmacy.com and you can try it, because a lot of times you don't really need the doctor. If you can sort of biohack your own biology and figure out what's working, what's not working. And then once you figure out, oh my God, I lost 10 pounds this week, and I feel so much better, and my joint pain's gone, and my headaches are gone, and my nose isn't running, and my digestion's working, and I sleep better. And it's like, well, how did that all happen? It's because your body is so powerfully influenced by food. We always talk about food as medicine, not like medicine. It is medicine. And it has tremendous effects on curing all kinds of illnesses if we actually used it. And that's what this is. It's a very medicinal diet that tastes freaking amazing.
Yeah, right.
So it's not like you're suffering.
Right. So, and he felt really motivated. He was really happy. But, he actually had a lot of other things going on. So he had lost some weight, but then we we also noted, through questions, we found out that, okay, he might have some issues with sleep.
Yeah.
He was snoring. His blood pressure was a little high. He had all this weight gain.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? We really need to get a sleep study on you.
Yeah.
And so when we did the sleep study, we found out that he had sleep apnea.
Yeah.
And
Which is so common and underdiagnosed.
Yes. And sleep apnea, where people stop breathing in the middle of the night, even though they don't realize it, right? They're snoring, and then they have episodes of apnea where they don't get any oxygen into the body. That in and of itself triggers insulin resistance. So that causes high levels of insulin in the body, which then, as we've been talking about, causes us to gain weight around the belly.
So wait a minute. So what you're saying is if you don't sleep, you get fat even if you don't change your diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
This is something people need to realize, because people think it's about what you eat and exercise.
Yeah.
And yes, it is, but there are other factors that have to be looked at that most doctors miss.
So often when somebody has sleep apnea or might have the signs of sleep apnea, they think, okay, I'm just going to lose weight and then it will go away, right? But so often it's the sleep apnea that's causing the weight gain.
Yeah.
And, of course, it becomes a vicious cycle.
Sure.
But that sleep apnea causes high levels of inflammation in the body, and it causes high levels of insulin, and it just causes us to put on weight.
And it also is one of the biggest causes of high blood pressure that's not
Absolutely.
diagnosed. I remember this one guy I had who was like a lawyer, he was in his 50s, and he's like, Mark, I have to work at my desk, but I have a standing desk because, and this is before standing desks were popular, because if I sit down, I fall asleep. And I'm like, you fall asleep driving home? You fall asleep watching TV? Do you snore? He's like, yeah. I'm like, you have sleep apnea. Let's get you tested.
Yep.
We got him a CPAP machine. He lost 50 pounds.
Yep.
Just boom, like that. Putting on a sleep apnea machine every night.
Right. Because you're actually getting oxygen into the body. So the body's not at stress anymore. And so the insulin levels come down, the inflammation comes down in the body, and then the weight comes off. I think when people have undiagnosed sleep apnea, when it's not being treated, we can do all these great things in terms of shifting their diet and putting them on an exercise regimen and looking for other issues. But if we don't deal with that, it's almost like I always say to them, it's like you're running against the wind. You're not going to get to your goals.
Yeah,
and so we've got to deal with the sleep issues. And like you said, it's so common.
And this guy didn't just have sleep issues. He had the insulin issue, he had the sleep issue.
Yep.
His thyroid wasn't right?
Yep, exactly. We checked his thyroid, and he had some elevated TSH. He had some low thyroid, and he had some thyroid antibodies that hadn't been discovered before. So then we dealt with all this autoimmune stuff going on. And so we took him off of gluten. Well, he was already off it because of the reset, but we kept him off of gluten. And so we were working on every aspect of his health.
Yeah.
And that's when he got to his goal weight,
Yeah.
right? When we worked on every aspect of his health.
Yeah.
And we helped him also get on a diet that he could maintain
Yeah.
forever,
Yeah.
right? Which is what the goal is.
It's so true. And, it's important. Like we often joke, we say we're holistic doctors because we take care of people with a whole list of problems. And, it's often not one thing, it's many things.
Yes.
And, everything's so siloed in medicine. So there's a sleep doctor, there's a thyroid doctor, there's a weight doctor. It's like, forget it. In functional medicine, we take a step back and we look at the whole system.
Yep.
And we're able to map out. And this is this one guy. Another guy who's overweight might have different issues, right?
Absolutely.
And so we might have to look at their toxin load or their gut
Yep.
microbiome or their, levels of nutritional status that affect their metabolism. So, we really have a very sophisticated lens to look through to understand what are all the imbalances in all the systems of the body and how do they affect any different disease. So the truth is, we have so many different illnesses that we diagnose in medicine, but they're all connected by very common root causes. Just like, you can send a man to space with incredibly few simple physics laws, right? Very few laws of physics, and they actually can help you do something incredibly complex. The same way the human body has some basic laws of biology, and we follow those laws, we can help people get better. It's just learning how to unlock all of that. And that's really the beauty of functional medicine, and we actually have the ability to personalize our treatments to get people better from things that often they don't get diagnosed or that traditional medicine doesn't have a great approach for. Hey YouTube, if you like this video, you're gonna love the next one. Click on it to check it out today. Functional medicine is about getting rid of the things that impair health and putting in the things that help the body thrive. And then the body can take over and with its amazing intelligence can repair and heal from all sorts of things.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And that's what we do.